This show is produced by the Hartman Media Company. For more information and links to all our great podcasts, visit hartmanmedia.com.
Speakers, publishers, consultants, coaches, and info marketers unite. The Speaking of Wealth Show is your roadmap to success and significance. Learn the latest tools, technologies, and tactics to get more bookings, sell more products, and attract more clients. If you're looking to increase your direct response sales, create a big-time personal brand, and become the go-to guru, the Speaking of Wealth Show is for you. Here's your host, Jason Hartman.
It's my pleasure to welcome Diane DiResta to the show. She is the author of a couple of books. Her new book, Knockout Presentations, How to Deliver Your Message with Power, Punch, and Pizzazz. Diane, welcome. How are you?
Thank you. I'm great. Thanks for having me.
It's good to have you. You're coming to us from New York City. Is that correct?
I am.
Fantastic. Well, look, there have been a lot of teachers throughout history on the power and skill needed to be a great presenter, a great public speaker. And this is such an important skill. It is possibly the most important skill. But talk to us about the persuasion side, especially, if you would. Everybody is persuading. Everybody is selling something. They're selling an idea, a movement, a cause, a product, whatever it is. How can speakers be more effective at that?
Well, you are speaking my language because a lot of times people don't realize that they're persuading all the time. And one of the biggest mistakes people make is they're speaker-centered. And by that, what I mean is when they pitch, they'll say things like, I want to talk to you about this great idea, or I want to tell you about my project, or I want you to look at my proposal. And people don't care. They only care about their own self-interest. So when I work with people, I take them through a process, and I call it listener-centered communication. And it's surprising, but it's a shift for so many people, including people in sales. And what it is reversing that process. In other words, instead of starting with what you want or your recommendation, you start with what they want. So what is the hook, the need, the desire, the dream? And then we back in. So would you like me to take you through a process? I use H.I.R.B.E.C as an example.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So this H.I.R.B.E.C is an acronym, right?
Yes, I made it up.
Okay, what does it stand for?
It doesn't mean anything as a word, but it stands for hook, issue, recommendation, benefits, evidence, and conclusion. And the reason I put that together is so that people would have a template in their heads, because I've seen so many poor presentations and so many people derail in meetings because they can't organize their thoughts. And I'm talking about even C-level people like CFOs who are so circuitous. So it helps you to organize any thought and allows you to be much more persuasive.
Okay, one more time on the acronym.
H.I.R.B.E.C, H-I-R-B-E-C. So it's hook, issue, recommendation, benefits, and by the way, that's your opening, evidence, which is your middle, and C is close, H.I.R.B.E.C.
All right, good. Take us through it.
All right, so the first step is the hook. You've got to get people's attention. We know that even today with video, if you don't grab someone in the first 3 seconds, they're gone. So don't talk about what you want. Talk about what they want. So think of that headline, that grabber. What's their desire, or what's standing in their way, or what do they really want? Once you get their attention with the positive statement, then you talk about what's standing in the way of that dream or that desire or that goal. And that's the problem, the issue, the need, or the current situation. And by the way, you can use this process for an informational talk too. All right, so now you've established a need, because if they don't recognize that there is some kind of issue or need, they're not going to listen to your next part, which is your recommendation. Here, it's step 3, not at step 1. Step 3, you talk about what is important, how you're going to solve that problem or issue. And you do this in a very short executive summary style. You don't get stuck in the weeds because, again, this is still your opening. So here's where you introduce your idea, and then you back it up quickly with benefits. So that hook, issue, recommendation, and benefits part is your opening. And what you've done now is you've gotten their attention, and now you have an interested listener. So let me give you an example that I give people. let's say someone is in a company and they're overworked. They want to get their boss to hire an assistant or another person. Most people would go in with what they want. They'd say, I have to talk to you because I'm overworked and I'm not going to be able to get all of this paperwork done. So we really need to hire a second person. And I ask audiences, what is the boss's knee-jerk response to that? And it's, well, we don't have it in the budget, or, well, that's why we hired you, or let's look at your time management, because you're talking about your needs and not theirs. So what we do is we reverse that. What do managers care about? So here's a different way to approach it, which will make you more persuasive. Manager, in the 6 months I've been on the job, I've been looking at my workload, and there's a way that we could be a lot more productive. Now you have somebody's attention because you're speaking their language. Well, the issue as I see it is that I'm spending 90% of my time on paperwork, which means I'm not getting on the phones as often servicing our customers. But by having a second person, maybe a temp, dedicated to paperwork, what that would do is we would be 100% compliant, and we'd have happier customers, and we'd be overall more productive as a department. Now you set it up so that your need or your issue, what you want, your recommendation, is solving a problem. The manager may not have been aware of that problem. Now, they're not going to say yes right away because you have to prove it. So now you've got their attention. The next step is for you to prove it. And here's where you bring in your evidence. You're going to do your research, your facts, your quotes, your analogies, whatever you think that person is going to relate to. Okay. And then once you prove your point, then you're going to recap and ask to move forward. So in order to be more productive, all we need to do is get another person, and I'd be happy to start that search for you.
Right. You talk about how, what do you say, great speakers are born, but effective speakers are made?
I do. I say that all the time because I really believe it. But even with great speakers, say a Martin Luther King, even those great speakers spent years honing their craft. But there are certain people who have a talent, and I don't deny that. But anybody can be effective in communicating a thought and being influential in getting what they want. If you know how to approach the person. And so the other piece to this, because that's listener-centered communication, the key word there is listen. And that's why I have a whole chapter on listening, because people don't spend enough time really understanding the audience or the listener, really profiling them. And so when I work with people, I have them do a deep dive and profile that listener and find out, how are they wired? How do they like to receive information? Is there any past history that you should be aware of? What are their attitudes about you, about the topic, about the department? And so the more you know about that person, the more you can tailor your message. And, unfortunately, a lot of times people have a standard presentation style or presentation, and they give it over and over again. And sometimes it's great, and other times it's not, because the audience is not appropriate.
Okay, so this is research that you're doing in it. When you say listening, it's really understanding the background. It's more than listening, right? Is this something you do in advance of the presentation, or can you actually do it from stage, in essence, by looking at body language, obviously, and getting feedback, asking questions of the audience, participation? Dive into that a little deeper.
You can, but the more upfront research you do, the more effective, because you want to develop that for that audience. So doing your LinkedIn research or talking to people that know those people, and then putting together your presentation. And here's another mistake that people make. The reason their presentation goes all over the place is because they're not focused. And so I often work with people to get laser-like focus, and here's how you do it. You fill in the blank. At the end of my presentation, the audience will blank. That answer is your focus or your outcome. When you're crystal clear about your outcome, then everything that you do to develop and craft that message is going to lead you to that outcome, and it's going to keep you on task. I often joke, though, not to do this, because this is what someone said in one of my audiences. Their answer to this was, at the end of my presentation, the audience will applaud. Well, how nice for you. That is not an outcome, So
I'd rather make it standing ovation, but okay, yeah.
But, why are you there? It's about the why. What do you want to have happen? And sometimes there are interim conclusions or interim closes. So maybe you're not going to get a yes for this one, but maybe it's an agreement to come back a second time. But be really clear at each presentation point, at the end of it, did you achieve your outcome or not? If you're not clear about your outcome, you don't know.
Yeah. You've got some checklists in the book, and I'd like to ask you about two of them. In Chapter 6, Structuring the Presentation, which leads right into Chapter 7 about checklists for persuasion. Can you tell us about those?
Yeah, and I actually have a separate checklist from the book, too. There are things to think about when you are presenting, and at the end of every chapter, I have do's and don'ts. Is that what you're referring to?
Yes, you call them checklists. I mean,
So I wrote this as a seminar in a book so that if I'm not there, this is the next best thing to having me there. So for people who don't like to read, you can go through the ends of every chapter and read the do's and don'ts, and you'll get the gist of what it was about. And it'll give you practical tips that you can use immediately. So every chapter has those checklists or do's and don'ts. And there are templates in the book as well. So for Chapter 7, Listener-Centered Communication, there are actual blanks that you can fill in, because I really believe that anybody can do this, but they don't always have the structure. And one of the things I've discovered that I didn't know when I first started out is that delivery sits on structure. And by what I mean by that is it's not enough to be glib or funny. There's a structure and a foundation under that. And if you don't have a solid structure, that's where you lose your power. That's where you go off message. So people have to first be really clear and structured in their talk.
Yeah,
and that's a key. That's a key to being influential and persuasive.
Sure. Yeah, of course it is. Talk to us about some of the great speakers. You that quote you have about they're born, but effective speakers are made. Anything we can learn from the greats throughout history, these speeches that just get people to march, right? Those kinds of things.
Well, I would say the great speakers have several things in common. One is passion. They deliver their message with passion. I don't know any great speaker who's a monotone or who has low affect. They're very passionate about their messages. They're not all like Tony Robbins off the charts, but they feel intensely, and that comes across to the audience. Another thing they have in common is they've mastered the pause. And I often tell people,
pause, right?
Yes, and some are more dramatic than others. And it's a real skill that is very hard for most of us, because most people are afraid of silence. And I often tell people that the person who can tolerate silence is the one that has the power. So if you think of a poker player, if you think of a negotiation, the person who speaks first is usually in a weaker position. So practicing the pause, holding the space, and that's presence. And when I work with people to increase their executive presence, this is a part of it. Holding the space, having that gravitas where you don't have to feel the urgency to speak immediately. Mm-hmm. So I would say it's passion, it's pausing, and they're great storytellers. Mm-hmm. I don't know any great speakers who do not tell stories.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Storytelling. I mean, we can dive into this one for 3 days and talk about the hero's journey and Joseph Campbell, mm-hmm. and there's a few others out there, but Campbell clearly seems to be the leader in the storytelling world. What are some of the basics of storytelling?
Well, the first thing is, again, every story has a structure. So you need to know the structure. And of course, the key storytelling structure is the hero's journey. But you also need to relive it. Some people simply recite it. That's not effective storytelling. It's truly being in the moment and reliving it, because when you relive it, the audience does it along with you and they feel it. And so if you are telling a story and you're in the story and there's someone else, you actually want to use your body and your voice in a way that shows those different personalities. So let's say you're talking about a time when you were a child. Well, maybe you want to look up at that person when you're the child, and you want to use a child's type voice. And if it's an authority figure, then you're going to look down at the child and use a deeper or a stronger voice. So getting in role is really important. And again, to relive the experience so that you feel the emotions, so they come through you and not from you.
Very, very good point. That's very good. Being in it, not just talking about it, right? Much more powerful. You talk about in the setting the stage, just this general concept of creating a positive atmosphere. How do you do that?
Well, it first has to come from you. So when I work with people, it's about mindset and skill set. So you need to get your intention set, and you have to feel positive within yourself, whatever you need to do to get to that point. And then it's about focusing on the audience. And a lot of times people are so focused on themselves and what are they going to say next that they forget that it's not about them, it's about the audience. And so I talk about two things: prevention and intervention. The best speakers and presenters intervene in advance so they prevent these mistakes from happening. So they set up the message and they set up the room so that people know what to expect. So when you set something up, you're positioning your message so that it will be received, so the audience knows what to expect. But sometimes things go wrong. And so that's when you need to intervene and prevent. And so that's where you need certain techniques. So I have a chapter 10 on audience control, Q&A, and deadly disasters. And that's where you need to understand when you have difficulty in an audience, there's an underlying need that isn't being met. So rather than taking it personally, again, get out of your own ego, focus on them. All right, what's going on here? And when you understand what the need is, then that gives you the strategy. So for example, when you have that expert know-it-all in the audience, there are some speakers who would immediately get defensive or come from ego. And the easiest person to manage is that expert, because what they want is recognition. And so when you see that early on, give it to them. So when I've had experts in the room, I'd say, Joe, you've been out there for 8 years. What's been your take on that? And I start drawing them in, and it's amazing how they turn around so quickly.
Yeah, it really is. That's a great point. I've noticed that myself. I've handled it right and wrong over the years, both ways. They just want to be recognized. That's it. A lot of them really are experts, and the audience can benefit from their expertise. So why not make them part of your advisory
Absolutely.
board, right? Yeah.
It's a gift. And I can tell you a story of where I really had to use persuasion skills. And when we talk about influence and persuasion, again, it's about getting into the minds of the listeners and meeting their needs. I had my first big corporate account when I was starting out, and I was creating writing and presentation curriculum. And the big day came when I was going to deliver this to 70 MBAs. They were in a credit training program in a bank. The problem was that their manager scheduled their first credit exam the day after my training and mistakenly said to them, well, don't worry, you'll only be with Diane for half a day. Well, I was going to be with them a full day. By 4 o'clock, I got a call from the manager because they had gone into his office en masse saying they weren't going to go to my class. And his final words to me were, I'll never forget, Diane, I wouldn't want to be in your shoes tomorrow. So imagine, now I'm thinking about calling in sick, what could I do? But I knew if I did that, that would be career suicide. So obviously I didn't sleep well that night. I came in the next morning, and this is what I did. I said to them, what's important to me is I want to give you a quality seminar. And what's important to you is time. You want to be able to have time to study for your credit exam. How can we work this out? And then I stepped back and listened. And what we negotiated was a half day. And I have to tell you, I never had a more attentive, cooperative group than that day. We finished, they moved forward. And I would love to say we were great friends after that, but that was not the case. But for that particular presentation, it worked really well. So again, persuasion is not about glib sales techniques. It's truly caring about the other person and understanding and asking questions and being willing to negotiate.
Yeah, Diane, that is so true in just every area of life. It never ceases to amaze me. I teach investing and finance and economics all the time, right? And it never ceases to amaze me how many people in a real estate deal, a business deal, in anything deal, don't think about the counterparty. They just think about what they want. Like, how can people be so selfish and myopic, I wonder sometimes. And, I'm sure I've done that over the years also, but it's like you've got to simply put yourself in their shoes, sit on their side of the table and say, look, if I were, walking in their moccasins, as the saying goes, what would I want here? What, and then just give them that. You'll just be tremendously successful at whatever you do. I noticed one of my clients many years ago kind of taught me this just from strictly a money-only standpoint. When I was selling some of his properties for him, he was never very greedy, and this was a very successful person. And I thought, he always leaves a little bit on the table for the next person. And that's just the way to succeed in anything in life, right?
It's so true. And people think that this book is public speaking to 100 people. No, it could be one person, as you just described. And I don't know if it was Jim Rohn or Zig Ziglar. Somebody once said, to be successful, if you want to get what you want, help enough people to get what they want.
Yeah, and that quote, by the way, is Zig Ziglar, and he said, you can have everything in life you want if you just help enough other people get what they want. It's a great quote. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
And that's what listener-centered communication truly is. But again, it has to come from heart. You have to sincerely care about meeting the needs of other people. And when you say listening to an audience, that comes through. I can't emphasize enough. When you're in front of a group, a large group, if you show that you care about their needs, they feel that. If you're just using a technique, they feel that too.
Right.
And that's another thing that separates the good from the great.
Yeah. Very good. Good stuff. Give out your website and a final thought for us.
DiResta.com, D as in David, I-R-E, S as in Sam, T as in Thomas, A. DiResta.com, or as my friend says, DiResta, nobody is besta. But speaking is the new competitive advantage. You can't be without it. And everybody needs to perfect the skill. The bar has been raised, so continue to practice this. It will pay in dividends.
Excellent advice. Diane DiResta, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening. Please be sure to subscribe so that you don't miss any episodes. Be sure to check out the show's specific website and our general website, hartmanmedia.com, for appropriate disclaimers and terms of service. Remember that guest opinions are their own, and if you require specific legal or tax advice or advice in any other specialized area, please consult an appropriate professional. And we also very much appreciate you reviewing the show. Please go to iTunes or Stitcher Radio or whatever platform you're using and write a review for the show. We would very much appreciate that. And be sure to make it official and subscribe so you do not miss any episodes. We look forward to seeing you on the next episode.